Hello, and welcome to this episode of Functional Medicine for Real World Impact. I'm your host, Tracy Harrison, and the topic of the day is toxicity, in particular, hidden toxicity, an insidious and ubiquitous silent driver of disease. Welcome to Functional Medicine for Real World Impact, where we're diving into the complex, interconnected nature of health and disease, exploring not just theory, but practically what it takes to turn functional medicine insight into powerful, practical, real-world results. So please hit subscribe and let's get started. In functional medicine, we often look for what is missing from the body or from our life system in order to promote health. That might be inadequate nutrition, imbalanced levels of hormones, perhaps suboptimal sleep. But often the issue in disease promotion is not so much what's missing, but what might be present and hidden and promoting disease. Hidden toxins lurk in our food, in the air, in our water, in our personal hygiene and beauty products, in our household cleaning products and textiles, in medical procedures. But toxic overload can also exist in really unexpected places, like our chronic exposure to EMF or our thoughts, our emotions, our relationships. At the end of the day, whether it's chemical, physical, spiritual, or energetic, our body can only handle so much toxicity. In particular, the liver, the kidneys, the lymph, and the mitochondria can only process so much. And when our toxic load exceeds our capacity to biotransform and excrete those toxins, then dysfunction will follow. Today, we're going to explore some of the hidden spectrum of toxins, from microplastics to heavy metals, to some of the more insidious toxins found in our daily beauty products, which are a hot topic here in the age of, or the industry of anti-aging. I'm going to share a bit about how to recognize, how to prioritize, and how to release them. Then our bodies can get back to what they're designed to do, which is to heal and to provide resilient health. I want to start off today with 5 fundamental facts about toxicity. It is a complex area of functional physiology, certainly one that all practitioners can learn to master. But ultimately, a toxin is any substance that can cause structural damage or functional disturbance in the body. And perhaps more so than any other threat to our health, toxicity is bio-individual. There are myriad possibilities of toxins that we're exposed to in our day-to-day lives and different combinations. What I'm exposed to is different than what you're exposed to. And a level of toxicity or a type of toxicity might cause dramatic dysfunction and quickly promote disease in me, but it might not be the case in you. Our toxin tolerance is indeed individual, and I'm going to talk quite a bit about that today. There are more than 60,000 acknowledged chemicals in current industrial or commercial use. And when you consider the combinations of them that are marketed as chemical products, it starts to stretch up into the 250,000, 300,000 chemicals type of level. Certainly, less than 2% of even those foundational 60,000 chemicals have received safety testing of any kind. We have to accept fact number 1, that toxins are essentially everywhere and largely unavoidable unless you want to live in a bubble. And a big challenge and opportunity for us as practitioners is to help the topic of toxicity or toxic overload to be not quite so ominous and overwhelming to the patients and clients we serve, so that people can feel educated, inspired, and empowered to do something about the toxic overload that might be promoting their disease. Part of this ubiquitous nature of chemicals is our culture that promotes better living through chemistry and is constantly supporting the development of more and more chemicals. Their presence is rapidly increasing in both volume and variety. But indeed, we can understand where they lurk and we can reduce exposure. Second critical foundational fact about toxicity is we are designed to be detoxification machines. We are designed to manage and biotransform and excrete toxins readily. This happens primarily in our urine, going through the kidneys, and through our stool, coming through the GI tract. But we also use sweat, hair, fingernails, tears from our eyes, and even our breath as lesser pathways for toxin excretion. But a key consideration here is that what the body doesn't readily process and excrete, it necessarily has to keep in circulation and eventually, usually put in storage in the body. As our physiology understands, it needs to protect vital organs and systems from the insidious effects of toxins. Now, detox or detoxification is a word thrown around an awful lot in popular health communities and platforms. And certainly detoxification is much more complicated than I swallow a harmful substance and I just pee it out, or we just poop it out, right? This is what a lot of your patients believe. In reality, an awful lot of the toxins that we bring into the body, it may indeed be through swallowing, but it could also be through inhalation or the skin or other routes. We have to biotransform. We have to chemically prepare those substances to be excreted. It might be really easy to get it in the body, but it usually involves a 2, 3, 4 step process to get that chemical mobilized, often made more polar so we can be water soluble, so we actually can excrete it. And this is an energy intensive task. It requires quite a bit of orchestration of biochemicals in the body, especially enzymes that catalyze the process of detoxification. And like any other biochemical in the body, we have to make these substances, and they require micronutrients. And the process of detoxification is nutrient intense. It uses up a tremendous amount of, say, B vitamins and minerals. And because in the process of converting these toxins to allow excretion, meanwhile, they're wreaking oxidative havoc on the body. So their presence dramatically increases our antioxidant requirement. And we can readily get toxins in the body, and part of the bioindividuality that makes the difference between whether or not we're suffering with notable disease because of it or not has to do with how well our genetics, our nutrition, our lifestyles, our stress levels, all in concert are either promoting detoxification or not promoting detoxification. It is true that a lot of toxins can be well managed and excreted by a healthy body, but this requires nutrients. There are a lot of myths related to detoxification. And as I said earlier, toxin tolerance is highly individual, depending on a number of factors. But I want in point number 4 here to call out specifically the contention that the body has some sort of an inherent ability to quickly eliminate all the adverse chemical compounds that it's wrestling with is inaccurate. Many toxicants, again, require multiple stages of biotransformation to be excreted. Many toxins have long half-lives, and both of these factors mean that they can indeed and often do accrue in the blood and then can indeed be sequestered in tissues. Anything from truncal adipose tissue to bone, where, for example, we like to store lead, to the brain, for example, where we like to store mercury. And point number 5 is perhaps the most important. Toxicity must be part of your clinical focus as a practitioner, regardless of your modality, regardless of whether you use medications or use supplements or use advanced testing or not. Every practitioner is capable, and I believe responsible, to investigate toxic overload as a prominent and perhaps particularly insidious driver of disease. So with that foundation, I want to share with you 5 notable hidden sources of toxicity that are worth prioritizing. These are elements that your patients need to be educated, inspired, and empowered about changing. Some of them are more obvious and often overlooked, and some of them are seldom acknowledged. And therefore, we need to bring them to the forefront in order to help our patients be empowered. Number 1, the air we breathe can be incredibly toxic, but in particular, the air you breathe in your home. Research shows that indoor air is nearly always twice as toxic as outdoor air, but it can be as much as 4, 5, or 10 times more polluted than outdoor air. Part of this, as we move into the cooler months here, is that it's cold outside and we're much more likely to shut our windows, to be outside less often. And therefore, the indoor air that we are inhaling is much more likely to be contaminated, showing residues with anything from VOC outgassing from paint and other construction materials, high toxicity cleaning agents or antibacterial products that are ubiquitously used these days, mold, especially in commercial buildings that might struggle with water contamination, outgassing from all sorts of textiles or material treatments, whether it's flame retardants or stain resistant materials. The point here is that regular exposure, especially in our home, to this type of load can promote anything from chronic sinus congestion to daily morning headaches, perhaps even migraines, respiratory infection, poor sleep, histamine overload that might manifest as anxiety or gastrointestinal distress, all sorts of chemical hypersensitivity as well. But the most insidious form of air toxicity that I want to make you aware of are what we call air fresheners. I think it's ridiculous that we refer to something that is a artificial concoction of multiple, usually dozens of chemicals to give off a fake scent, that we would call that an air freshener. I guess that's marketing at its best. But those plug in to the electrical outlet air fresheners, the little trees that hang from your rearview mirror in your car to give off some type of fake scent, the things that sit on your countertop that you twist open to give off this fake aroma to cover other smells in a household. All of these are loaded with phthalates. And phthalates are particularly insidious endocrine disrupting chemicals. And we would be so much better off to actually use an air filtration system, an air purifier, perhaps with a HEPA and carbon filter in order to actually take contaminants out of the air. And if the air feels stale or contaminated, being able to open a window in order to allow in fresh air. But the air we breathe is often taken for granted. We look more insidiously at other hidden toxins. We're worried about mercury and BPA, but the air we breathe is ubiquitous and something we do incessantly. And so in particular, household air is a common source of hidden toxicity. Number 2, I want to dovetail on what I was just sharing around phthalates and air fresheners to talk about fragrance. Fragrance is a word on an ingredient label that should stand out to you as meaning toxicity. because they are insidious, specifically, as I said, as being endocrine disrupting chemicals. And these can show up in vinyl materials, in personal care and beauty products, things like nail polish. They are often added to laundry detergents under the name of fabric softener. I've never seen a fabric softener that also didn't have that fake fresh scent associated with it, but any type of cleaning product that has a fragrance added. And for that matter, the vast majority of perfumes are also loaded with these phthalate chemicals. And research has shown that these can play a marked role in hormone imbalance in the body, contributing to anything from early puberty to infertility, low testosterone, aggressive, highly symptomatic PMS symptoms, maybe heavier menstrual bleeding, this aggregate estrogenic overload. Phthalates are in an insidious form of xenoestrogen that can either mimic estrogen enough to fit in estrogen receptors or modulate the binding affinity of those receptors, or perhaps impair estrogen metabolism. The effects can really be insidious. And the category of these that I think is most insidious and is something I recommend, just like those plug-in air fresheners or tabletop air fresheners, is that we get rid of dryer sheets and perhaps also fabric softeners. Dryer sheets are designed to take just cleaned clothes and put chemicals all over them in a hot environment that will bake the chemicals in a plastic coating onto your just cleaned laundry. It's illogical, and it's certainly not getting anything clean, but it will give those fabrics a durable, fake, fresh-like scent that if you've never done it, you should experiment. You may have to wash those clothes with hot water and a super clean detergent with no chemicals. I have had to wash them 5, 7, 10 times before that scent goes away, because there are plastic-like additives in dryer sheets designed to make sure that those chemical fragrance elements bind to your clothing. And again, we often pull them out of the dryer when they're nice and hot, and we're inhaling all of these phthalate-laden fake chemicals. Definitely a huge source of hidden toxicity, and a huge opportunity to do a little more research and make some higher quality recommendations for personal or household cleaning and detergent types of products. Now, related to that, of course, is the topic of plastics. And plastics are becoming ubiquitous. 2 decades ago in the functional medicine world, we spoke all the time about heavy metals, which I'm going to get to. But I think of microplastics today as almost being like the new modern heavy metal, because they are insidious. We increasingly drink bottled water. We increasingly wear synthetic clothing. Again, if you've put through a whole dryer load of polyester clothing and you open it up, you're aerating and inhaling a tremendous amount of microplastic fibers. We buy more food that's packaged in plastics, and then we want to microwave it or heat it in plastics. We make our tea and our coffee in these pods that are plastic. Some studies estimate that we might have an entire credit card's worth of microplastics in our body at any one time. And these can actually work synergistically with endocrine disruptors, because it can be a vehicle for transporting endocrine disrupting chemicals not only into the body, but into cells. And this is where we need to start paying attention to, where are we using plastic? It's become ubiquitous, so we often don't even pay attention to where it might lie. I think one of the most important first steps just like getting rid of the air fresheners, getting rid of the dryer sheets. An easy, simple step is to never heat anything in plastic in a microwave or an air fryer, but to take it out of that packaging and put it in something glass, perhaps covered with a paper towel or a thin towel, in order to keep your microwave clean if you're microwaving food, but to not heat anything in plastic. It is absolutely not true that there is no outgassing from heating plastic to really high temperatures in order to allow the food contained within it to basically steam aggressively and to cook quickly. So another key consideration with regard to hidden toxins. Heavy metals, I mentioned earlier, and I think this is a category that many of us tend to be quite aware of. And it's a great reminder, by the way, the ultimate example that just because something is natural does not mean it is safe. Mercury is incredibly natural. It is an element, but it is widely agreed to be the most toxic substance, especially singular element, to human physiology and biochemistry. And beyond the obvious bolus buckets of mercury amalgam fillings in our mouths, which are 50% mercury that are constantly outgassing, being inhaled, being swallowed, being absorbed through our tissue in our mouth, we're aware of these. Mercury is insidious as a toxin, especially as a neurotoxin. But I want to say a brief word about two sources of heavy metals that I find are often overlooked. One of them is aluminum. If we're not drinking something out of plastic, we often are drinking highly carbonated or acidic beverages out of aluminum cans. And this also leaves a mark with regard to the possibility of aluminum toxicity. And I also find many practitioners lose sight of the fact that there are many over-the-counter gastrointestinal remedies, in particular anti-gas formulas or remedies for constipation that they celebrate that aluminum is the top ingredient, component of the active ingredient. And individuals who have chronic IBS, we see this all the time in the cases we supported SAFM. They may be using this medication every day, maybe twice a day. They might do that for years. And this is a great example where something overtly toxic is literally hidden, and we won't know it until we read the ingredient list and do deeper research. Teach your patients to not be just swayed by the marketing on the front of a product label, but to turn it over and specifically look at the ingredient lists. Now, the next category I want to talk about is something a bit less physical, and it is really about electromagnetic overload. My goodness, we have fully advanced here into the digital age. An awful lot of people you support in your practice are spending an inordinate amount of time on screens. They grab their phone first thing in the morning. They may go watch the morning news or a podcast while they're commuting to work. They sit at a desk and look at a terminal all day, or they're looking at social media during their breaks on their phone. And then they get home and they watch Netflix or they watch TV. And we are chronically being exposed to blue light, to video that has very rapid refresh rates that hyperstimulates catecholamines, especially dopamine in our brains. And we also are living in an environment, whether it is 5G cellular networks or our own ubiquitous wireless router in our home or in our work environments, we're constantly being exposed to EMF. And just like any other toxin, there is bio-individual tolerance for this. And there are many patient cases where insomnia or morning fatigue, heart palpitations, anxiety, glucose spikes, especially at night, or a disrupted cortisol curve, might be driven by this chronic flood of EMF. And we have to teach people that this is not an imaginary force or an imaginary toxin. We know that, in particular, being exposed to just the radiation itself, right? Just this component of the spectrum can have insidious effects. But if it comes along specifically with very stimulating information, a crime or horror movie, depressing news, doom scrolling in social media, paying bills, having arguments, planning work for the next day late at night. All of these things are naturally going to increase stress hormones. And the collection of the EMF, the rapid refresh rate, and the strong stimulatory activity can markedly disrupt our circadian rhythm. And helping people to purposefully take breaks in order to allow some relaxation, the restoration of some parasympathetic neurotransmission. These are powerful interventions. They are often overlooked by practitioners and patients alike because they seem almost too simple to be true, seem too simple to be scientifically valid or worthy. But we need to be taking a break from these. Getting away from our phones. And a simple way in particular to do this is to remove the phone from the sleeping room. I'm amazed at the number of people who sleep with their phone on them, under their pillow, stuck into their women if they use a sleep bra, which was a whole nother topic for another podcast, but they slip it into their clothing. They might lie on it. They may put it under the mattress. But of course, especially with 5G, there is marked radiation being given off by these phones, and the body never gets a break. And sleep can't be restorative unless sleep is a time when we relax and surrender to the necessary healing and repair that can take place overnight, but it won't take place overnight if the body feels threatened. If the body feels that even overnight it needs to fight, flight, and hide, and it can't fully relax into maximum secretion of melatonin, maximum synthesis and activity of other antioxidants to heal us from the day's free radical or pro-oxidant demand and damage, then we are day by day, night by night of this imbalance promoting chronic disease. So don't forget about EMF toxicity and circadian overload. But number 5, the category I want to talk about is definitely the most overlooked and hidden source. And we've talked about some easy ways, right, to begin to tackle some of these, whether it's getting rid of the air fresheners, whether it's plug-in or countertop, or addressing the phthalates that are hidden in dryer sheets and fabric softeners, to addressing the huge exposure to microplastics that we're exposed to on a regular basis, to being able to at least sleep with the phone in another room so that there's no exposure to that, not only interruption, but that radiation. Well, the 5th one I want to talk about is what I believe for many people, the largest source of hidden toxicity, and that is the voice in their head. We all have that relentless voice in our head that is keeping up a persistent conversation. And the chat going on in my head is likely very different from the chat going on in your head or the chat going on in any of your patients' heads. This is where our bioindividuality reigns in the realm of belief systems, priorities, worries, mindsets, our spirituality. So many different factors collude to determine the voice in our head. And of course, our earlier life experience, whether it was traumatic or involved different types of crisis and stress and survival threats, that also is going to inform the voice in our head and how our ego, our amygdala, and other survival-oriented parts of our brain are trying to protect us. But the voice in our head is really, other than sleep, something we never get a break from. And so being able to talk to your patients about what their typical thoughts are, and when things happen that are very stressful or things that are challenging, being able to say, if I may, let me just ask you, what do you think about that? What kind of thoughts come up for you? Or when you're going through your days with that in your environment, what kinds of messages are you saying to yourself in your head on a regular basis? This is something that many, many people are simply unaware of. They don't pay attention to it. They've never really set themselves to the side, if you will, and reflected on, turned an objective eye to that voice in their head. But for many people, the voice can either be tidal wave of fear and worry and disaster prognosticating and playing forward the worst possible scenarios so people can feel prepared. It could also be not fear, but perhaps guilt or shame. Maybe being the victim of your own perfectionism, constantly criticizing and castigating yourself for never measuring up, never being perfect. There are many potentially toxic modes of self-talk, but for sure, our entire physiology is listening to that voice, and it can be a major source of stress. We know that persistent stress, it can be multifactorial, often leads to elevated levels of stress hormones, especially cortisol. And while short-term surges of cortisol may help us to survive, we need that to fight, flight, and hide. Higher cortisol is increasing our blood sugar, increasing our blood pressure, increasing our heart rate, all in the name of fighting, flighting, and hiding as necessary to survive. But we only thrive if that sympathetic nervous system activation is temporary. It has to end so that the parasympathetic response can come in and repair the damage that the sympathetic state did. Many of your patients are trying to get all the things right. They love working with you. They change their diet. They change maybe other sources of toxicity. They've improved their sleep. They're improving their movement. They're doing lots of things, but their inner world may be constantly working against them in promoting disease. And this is because when we're in a sympathetic nervous system state, the body purposefully deprioritizes certain physiology and biochemistry because it's not really needed to survive until tomorrow. The body puts much more effort into muscle contractions and hormone synthesis and glandular secretions and a focus in physiology that helps us to fight, flight, and hide. And this means during those times, other critical functioning like detoxification or fertility are deprioritized in order to allow the body to focus on what it needs to survive. We need to get into a parasympathetic nervous system state in order to optimally biotransform and excrete all toxins. And so make sure that this delving into the inner world of possible toxicity is a part of your clinical focus at the right time and in the appropriate way for what a specific patient is ready, willing, and open to doing. But make sure it's part of your work. Otherwise, you might be overlooking and setting aside the most insidious type of toxicity that is actually potentially preventing someone from getting well and staying well. So that is what I have for you today. There are so many types of toxicity, and a common misstep in functional clinical practice is to overlook hidden sources of toxins. A second common misstep is to focus on mobilizing and clearing toxins too early in an overall clinical journey. In general, we would like to resolve some of the most debilitating imbalances, especially immune system or nervous system imbalances, before we dive into resolving toxic overload so that we can do it more from a place of strength. One of the most common things that I've seen in case after case after case over the years at SAFM is a patient that improved only a little bit, maybe 15-20%, and then their clinical progress stagnates or even backtracks. And that is because detoxification was prioritized too soon in the clinical plan, and or it was approached too aggressively. Often people have taken decades to bring on board the toxic burden that they are wrestling with. And so we need to consider taking a much lower and slower path for mobilizing and biotransforming and excreting those toxins. We have an entire 8.5 hour clinical course in our practitioner program at SAFM on toxicity and detoxification, because there's so many nuances of how to do it well and pitfalls to avoid on how to do it poorly. So make sure you're considering toxicity, toxic overload, and hidden toxicity in the patients and clients that you serve. Thanks for joining me.